So we're going to do a Q&A session. So I'm going to go over a bunch of the questions that people have asked and answer those questions. And then obviously anyone who's here and in the chat, if you got some questions, I got some answers. So Helios A Flame asks, thoughts about a topic that was talked about weeks ago that I just figured out how I feel about. Chris was saying that making heroes initially available in Callasia was a bad decision because people complained and there's no reason to play single player. He goes on to talk about his feeling was that the campaign itself was not compelling enough to draw people into the campaign, and that maybe solving the issue by saying, hey, you got to play campaign if you want to open up these things is not necessarily the answer. And he says, in fairness, part of this was due to Callasia's base mechanics. Its combats were auto-resolved, and the good part of this, it keeps things snappy, but the bad part is the implementation was such that the mechanics were very obscure, and it's unclear when you start out what makes for good compositions or what counters what, so there's nothing for people to make decisions based off of. Yeah, I kind of get where you're going with this. And the heart of this conversation is a conversation that we've been having back and forth in the studio about what do we do with campaign? Does campaign unlock something? How often do you get your troops, etc.? And my feeling so far has been that the campaign, I'll be honest, the campaigns in Callasia were not as amazing as they could have been for a number of reasons. And honestly, one of the reasons the campaigns were a little bit drab in Callasia was a territory grabbing game, and as a territory grabbing game, at the end of the day, the only thing that you really could do as a player was take over territory, take over castles, build some stuff, and win the game. And so we really struggled when we put the story together about, like, what would these story elements be? What, you know, all right, in this story, you're going to take over the lands this way, and in this story, you're going to take over the lands that way. And that we were kind of trapped into that a little bit, and it did make for, to be honest, some kind of trouble in making interesting, fun stories within the campaigns. And so we're going to think about that a little bit harder in our campaigns in this game. And one of the things that's nice about having the hex-based terrains and having I guess a smaller world in a way. You know, in Callasia, when you looked at a map was whole kingdoms. It was, you know, there were like 8 kingdoms on one map. And so everything was by definition on this grand epic scale. In Last Regiment, we've said, let's pull that scale way, way down. Let's have that scale be a lot smaller so that people can do things like, you know, we can have missions that are like, walk over to that tower over there and do that thing on this tower over there. We didn't have that in Callasia. So we can have things like, you know, hey, make sure nobody takes over this farm, or, you know, hey, go take over 5 farms. There's all kinds of sort of small goals that we can do in a smaller world. We can tell a story that's more intimate and more about characters. So that's part of it. Part of the thing that we're doing with the campaign, and getting back to Helios's question about do we unlock or do we not unlock, I'm worried that what we made a mistake with in Callasia was you bought the game and here, have every single unit in the game, here, have everything. There was kind of a, you know, it felt very much to me like somebody who was allowed to unwrap all of his Christmas presents all at once. And I feel like in games, it's a little bit more interesting to have those things unwrap over time and to have somebody have to work to get some of these things. And I'm not sure exactly how that's going to play out yet. I'm not sure exactly what the mechanics of that are yet. And I think we'll know more about that when we get further into the game and we actually are putting together factions, and I'm seeing what it's like to put together factions, and we're getting a better idea for how many units and how many things there are in the factions. At that point, I think we can make better decisions about this stuff. So I think it's still an open question. Now, that being said, one of the other big things that we're doing is we're spending a lot of time on actually building a world this time. In Callasia, as everyone knows, the world was, you know, hey, it's fantasy, it's got orcs and elves, go, have fun. Like, we didn't think about it that much because I didn't think anyone cared. But we've been spending a lot of time over the last couple weeks talking about putting together a much more interesting world where discovering the characters from this world and discovering the things in this world is more meaningful and has some actual story to it. And again, I think a big part of that is bringing the scale of the game down, where it's not always you're going to take over 5 kingdoms in this one single campaign mission. That was a bit extreme. Here, where we're talking about this entire campaign mission is set in one small valley in the mountains, and we can actually have, well, this is the guy who lives in this valley, and let me tell you his story, and let me tell you how he fits into a bigger thing. I think that's going to be a better storytelling mechanic. So I think that's going to change our campaigns a little bit. So right now over in chat, there's the conversation about whether or not unlocks make sense in a strategy game or not in a strategy game. Where some people are saying, well, you know, this is kind of a trading card game the way you're building it, which it does have some trading card type elements in it. And I'm not sure if that works or doesn't work. So again, I think we need to get a little deeper into the game before we start making those distinct decisions, because I think it flows from the game itself. So let me put all of that in the, yeah, okay, I heard you guys, and let me think about all that box. So we get to the question about the mechanics being accessible, and this is something that Helios brought up a couple times in his comments. I agree. One of the big problems with Callasia, and this was something that was on the list of the 3 things that I was really, really hardcore about when we first started designing Last Regiment, was I felt that in Callasia a lot of the mechanics were nested deep in the game, and it was hard to really understand what did what until you spent some time with it. So you didn't know, okay, these archers, they have, you know, this missile attack, but the other guys have a melee attack. You didn't really immediately grok that. And then when they had special abilities like Frontline or something like that, just like Helios says, it was very difficult when you opened up the game to immediately know, oh, okay, this is going to do that. This is going to give me this. And part of it was because the battles were put on this this sort of secondary screen. So you started the game and you played on the big map, and then when the combat happened, you went to the little combat screen. I think people didn't really understand what happened in that combat screen. And so one of the first sort of dictates that I had when we put this game together was, we're not going to have that battle screen. If there's going to be a battle, the battle happens right on the main strategic map. I want to see it happen right there. I want to see the math right there. In the early testing that we're doing in this game, I like it a lot better because it's very clear. Look, this guy's got 3 hit points. This guy's got an attack of 2. They bang together. He's got 1 hit point now. I get that. Like a person playing anyone who's ever played a video game plays this game for 10 seconds and they're like, oh, okay, I get that. And then the special abilities are all right there in the sort of in your face. Oh, look, this guy can shoot missiles. Oh, look, this guy can make a fireball. Look, this guy can heal somebody. And they're right there, and they're all on the strategic map. And I think that's going to be a lot more straightforward for people to understand. Helios is in the chat, by the way, and he says the tutorial told you how ranged worked in melee, but the actual implications of it were super unintuitive. And it's true. I think it was unintuitive because it was nested deep into the game, and you kind of had to play it and mess around with it before you got it. And I think that was not great for the game, quite honestly. I think it was fun, it was interesting, but it's not something I'm going to repeat. So someone asked about a draft mode. So this is Merlin asking, I wonder how fun a draft mode would be in Last Regiment, since it's pretty much a card game played on a map where you have the whole deck available from turn 1. And the question is, good Pete, I wonder if letting players create regiments would work. Players can recruit their regiments to have... So let me kind of talk through kind of what we're talking about building. We're still in the process of putting this together, so hang in there. What you're going to do is you're going to put together regiments, and let's say your regiment has these 10 kinds of units in it. You'll actually be able to save a regiment, and then you'll actually be able to make a little regimental flag. If you see the thing right here, see the flag in the Last Regiment flag? You'll actually, in the same way you could make the shields in Callasia, you get to make little regimental flags, and you get to attach a little regimental flag to your regiment. And that's the regiment that you've made. And that regiment comes from choosing 3 factions. Right now we're saying 3, it might be more or less. but right now we're working with 3. So you choose 3 factions, which gives you access to something like 30 units. And out of that 30 units, you're going to pick the 10 that you want to bring, and that 10 is your regiment. That's what you're going to bring into the game and play. And we're going to let you save that in the same way that you can save a deck in Hearthstone. So if you've got a regiment of, I don't know, you call it Alara's Apes, right? So Alara's got her Alara's Apes regiment, and it's a bunch of apes and stuff. And she saves that out, and she gives it a cool little regimental flag that's got a little ape on it or something like that. She can then, and this is something I'm not promising, but it's something I would like to do, is I would like to say she can then put that somewhere where other people can see it and see, oh, and one of the things I notice when you look at trading card games is they always develop these wikis somewhere, and on the wiki there's like, here's a whole bunch of cool decks that you can play. And part of me says, well, why don't we put that right into the game? If Alara makes Alara's Apes and Alara's Apes is cool, why don't we throw Alara's Apes right up there? And so when I start the game, I'm like, I wonder what regiment I should build. I can actually go to a library of people's cool regiments that they've voted on and said, oh, this is a cool regiment, or this is one that's really powerful. They can have notes on it or something like that. I would love to build something like that. I'm not sure that we will or not. I'm not promising that, but that's something I would like to do. But what I am promising you'll do is Alara will be able to save Alara's Apes, and she'll have, you know, her regiments that she likes, and she can decide which one she wants to take into any particular battle. So if she's enjoyed playing Alara's Apes, when she plays again later, she can play Alara's Apes again. Merlin says, yeah, that's typical gameplay options. I was wondering if that might be similar to an arena in Hearthstone that, say, gives you 3 random options and you need to pick one. Oh, okay. I hadn't really thought about it, but actually that might be something fun. And in fact, it might even be fun to say, okay, everybody needs to pick from these 3 regiments for this. I mean, there's a lot of fun stuff that we can do with this, that we can play around with. And I think all of these are options, but I think they're a little bit further down the road in terms of let me get all this stuff up and play, and then let's see what's going to be fun. But I think the idea of, and I think somebody else had another idea that I thought was a very good one, of, all right, I get to vote on 3 cards that I'm just not allowing in this game. You can't play this card in this game because I don't like playing with those cards. That might be something we can do as well. It's a little bit more twiddly on how do we set up the user interface and all that for it. So there's that we have to look at. But I think the idea of, hey, let's play a game and it chooses, you know, here's 3 regiments and you get to pick your units out of those 3 regiments, and you didn't get to pick what those 3 regiments are. I'm sorry, 3 factions, and you don't get to choose what 3 factions they are, but now you have to choose units from those 3 factions. That's a possibility. Another one could be like a Hearthstone arena mode where it says, all right, here's 3 units. Which one do you want? That one? All right, here's 3 more units. Which one do you want? That one? We could do something like that as well. These are all things that we could play with, but I think we want to get a little further down the game before I start promising those things. And this is one of the dangers, and we should talk about this for a minute. This is one of the dangers of doing a dev thing like I'm doing right now, is people are like, dude, I watched this like 2 months ago and you totally said we were going to have that and you didn't have that. And they get all butthurt about it. And you're like, yeah, we wanted to do that, but maybe we didn't have the time to do it. Or maybe we actually tried it and it wasn't fun. Or we actually had some other idea that was a better idea. Or we did something else and this thing doesn't work with that thing in the way that we wanted. So there's always that level of me being really nervous about what we promise at this point in the process, because I don't know, right? I got to get in and I got to play some more stuff. I'll give you a great example. When we talk about the terrain here in a minute, I actually made this big, huge chart when we first started, and I gave it to the artist, and I said, I need all of these terrain pieces. And they went out and they built all these terrain pieces. And then I started putting the maps together, and I'm like, ooh, all these terrain pieces kind of suck. I got to do this again. And I actually forced them to go back in and redo a bunch of them. And it was a good solid 3 days worth of work for them to go redo all this stuff. And I'm sure they were pissed. They didn't, you know, they were cool about it and they didn't yell too much, but I'm sure they were pissed. But if somebody came back to me and said, but you promised me you were going to have all these pieces. Well, yeah, I had all those pieces, but I tried them. They sucked. We changed it. So there's always going to be that level of, us dicking around with the game as we go forward. And so if I say we're definitely going to have this thing, it means I'm going to definitely try to have that thing. And we're going to test it and we're going to build it and we're going to see if it's cool. But yeah, there's always a chance that it's not going to be cool. And that's the danger of getting involved in development this early on. But I think it's fun. And I think it's great that we can have these and we can have these conversations and people can express these interesting ideas. Like, it had not occurred to me to do an arena style mode in the game. That's a cool idea. Will we do it? Don't know. But it's certainly a cool idea. And it's certainly gone on the list of stuff we'll think about. So yeah, so Renegade Pige, hi Pige, mentions that something he really likes in Overwatch Clone Paladins is that you can look up top players in the world and auto use their decks. And yeah, that's actually kind of what I was getting at. One thing about the game is if you think about, all right, I think right now we've got 12 or so factions planned, maybe more. Every one of those 12 factions has like 10 units. Okay, that's 120 units. Out of those 120 units, you're going to pick 10 of them. If I actually sit down and do the math of, you know, which 3 factions did you choose and which 10 units did you choose out of those 3 factions, there are literally millions of combinations. Like, that's not hyperbole. The math actually works out. It's actually millions of millions. And so how do you, when you very first start the game, know what a good deck is? And the answer, if you play most trading card games, is I'm going to go online, I'm going to find some you know, Icy Veins or something like that, and look at the card decks there that somebody's laboriously entered, and then, you know, okay, somebody released a new update and somebody's got to go update all the decks and blah. That seems kind of lame to me, and it seems much more interesting to me to say, like, right here in the game I could go through a bunch of decks and say that looks like an interesting deck. And you know, again, I'm not promising this because this is pretty meta and I'm not sure if it's going to be cool or not. But what I would really like is some way for people to say, all right, I played this deck and I really liked it. I give it a, you know, I give it a thumbs up. And so now I can actually, because obviously if I say you can upload your, regiment and we have 100 players, each of those 100 players over a week upload 3 regiments because they think it's cool. I've already got 300 regiments up there. So how do you parse that? How do you go into the huge streaming mass of, yeah, this is slightly different than this one, I added 1 card here or something. And so I think having some kind of rating system or note system where you can say, you know, show me the ones that get played the most. And we might, you know, if let's say Alara puts her Alara's Apes deck up there, puts her Alara's Apes faction up for you to play, and somebody plays the Alara's Apes faction, because it's a multiplayer game, we've got a server. I could track things like how many times did Alara's Apes win, right? Not just when Alara played it, but when anybody grabbed the Alara's Apes faction and played the Alara's Apes faction, how many times did that actually win? That might be interesting stuff. And you could actually build a deck and see if your deck is a winning deck. That might be a really fun, cool meta to do. I'm not promising any of that. But I'm saying it's certainly interesting stuff that we will be looking into as we move forward. So Helios does bring up the point, how are you meant to experiment as a new player if everyone else is running toon decks copied from top players? There's always going to be that problem. And certainly when I play Hearthstone, every now and then I'm just like, this guy, he's playing that deck. You know, once you get into a game, you're like, you start to know the decks. You know, there's like, oh, this guy's playing that one Murloc deck, and I hate playing that. Or he's playing that one Thief deck where he keeps using the Shadow Step, and you're like, come on, that sucks. I'm so bored with this. So this is something we have to look for, and it's one of the reasons why I say I don't absolutely promise we're going to do this stuff, but it's stuff that I'm looking at that might be interesting. So it doesn't matter the game balance or not, it matters there's one deck on the front page voted at the top that says new player friendly in big letters. The deck doesn't even need to, yeah, and that's part of it. I think sometimes when you come into a game and you're just overwhelmed with options, you kind of want somebody to just be like, no, dude, play this. Like, there's something to be said for that. And there's a reason why Hearthstone does this, right? If you're going to make a brand new warrior deck in Hearthstone, it says, here's the basic warrior deck. Do you want to just play that? Maybe you want to grab that and just change it a little bit? And that's perfect. That's perfectly reasonable. That's there for new players because it is overwhelming to jump into a game and have, 500 options and okay, pick, and then you pick the wrong ones and you start playing and you just get your ass handed to you and you're like, oh, why did I screw this game, right? And so I'm trying to look for ways for noobs to have a chance. So there's all that. So Helios says, how are you meant to experiment as a new player if everyone else is running toon decks, copy from players? If there's a wiki, there'll be enough players not using it that you can find other experiments to fight. If it's in client, I'm not sure that that's true. Like I say, I think that's maybe also a problem. But part of that is going to be the challenge of trying to make sure that there's not an Uber deck, right? And that's always going to be a challenge in games like these to make sure that the game's not solvable where somebody's like, look, I found this one synergy between these 4 units, And as long as I understand how to do that, I'm just going to roll over you. And so here's the deck that has the exact units that you need to do that. And everyone plays that deck, and the game's not fun anymore. That's always a challenge in these kind of games. And this is why I don't think we're going to be shipping this game anytime soon, because just getting to the point where we can release a reasonable number of units in an opening game that doesn't suffer from those kind of problems is going to be a rather large undertaking, and it's just going to take a whole lot of early access and a whole lot of early testing, and that's just a thing that we have to put our heads around. There's no way to get around that. So, but you guys will be here for that, and you can help us with that. So, there's that. So Merlin asked yesterday, I wonder how feasible it would be to have alternate artwork or unit models for units in Last Regiment. There's nothing technically stopping us from doing it other than the fact that, dude, that's more artwork. And that's the cost. So right now, if you do the math, we've got planned at least 12 factions. Of those 12 factions, each one has 10 units. We're already at 120 pieces of art. That's actually a lot of art. That's going to cost us quite a lot of money to put together. So Merlin goes on to say, for instance, if you finish top 10 one month, your Heavy Knight unit gets a Death Knight artwork where it's covered in skulls or something like that. It's certainly a cool idea to get people to keep playing for a long period of time. And it's certainly stuff that has happened in other games. I mean, obviously Hearthstone has the gold units or that sort of thing. It would be cool. It's certainly a good idea, but I need to look at how we would handle that in a way that's not painful. I mean, one thing that we've talked about, for instance, is having, one thing that I think was really cute and fun in Hearthstone was the animated cards. So if you got the gold card, now your card has snow that falls in it or something like that. Our art in the game isn't quite as big in terms of where it sits, so I'm not sure that makes sense or doesn't make sense. But I'd like to come up with that idea of, hey, you played and you won and you get something and you can show off your trophies in game to other people, and obviously having a gold card or something like that is a trophy. I like the idea, but I'm already like crushed under the huge weight of artwork that we have to do to ship the base game. So that's probably something that I'm not going to commit to right now, just because holy crap, we have so much art coming up. So there's that answer. I'm not sure that's the answer you want. It does get into our question of, how do we keep people playing? How do we keep people grinding? We're not a free-to-play game. And one of the values of a game like Hearthstone that is a free-to-play game at the end of the day is there are people grinding. And if there are people grinding, there are people there who are going to be there, right? Because they're grinding. And so that means your multiplayer community is larger. And how do we, in a game that doesn't have the necessity to grind to get better units, how do we ensure that people are online and playing when you want them to be online and playing? I don't have a great answer to that challenge right now. And possibly those answers are things like, okay, there are grindable goals. Like if you play more multiplayer things, you get achievements, or you get these special things that you can show off in game or something. I would be interested in hearing people's ideas on that, because there is the question of, how do I make people get in and play more multiplayer games so that they are there for the people who want to play multiplayer games? And I think some of that has to do with a ranking system and making the ranking system more interesting. One of the things that, and I keep going back to Hearthstone just because it's a game I play a lot. This is true for a lot of games, but I keep using this as an example. The ranking system in Hearthstone also says at certain levels you're going to get the treasure chest, and the treasure chest is going to have decks in it, and it's going to have extra potions and stuff like that. And so there's always that feeling of, I want to climb up the ranks because at the end of the month I get a thing for it. I think we need to figure out what that is for us. And in a game that's not a free-to-play game, where I'm not forcing you to go out and buy 30 decks to try to get a rare drop, giving you an extra deck at the end of the month because you got a certain rank doesn't work, right? So we have to figure out what's our alternative to that. And certainly doing alternative art might be an answer to that question. From Helios, I have a question. How are Alliance being handled, if in at all? It felt like the community was so small in Callasia. By the end, pretty much all strategy was subsumed by whom was friends with whom in your game. Yeah, that question. That was that was obviously an issue in Callasia. And some people thought it was cool and some people didn't. That's what was funny. Some people were like, I love the fact that when I play, you know, this person who's always there, we always play together and we always team together and we're going to rag on whoever, goes against us. That was certainly part of the meta of Callasia. And part of that just came from Callasia had a really small community. So if you played Callasia, the chances that those people were there were pretty high. And some people got kind of butthurt about that. Yeah, that's an issue. That being said, holy shit, team play was totally fun. The alliances were totally fun. Making alliances and breaking alliances was totally fun. So yeah, we're going to have all that in the game again. That was way too fun to get rid of. The question is, how do we handle that issue? And the real answer is, have a game where the same 6 people aren't there every time you play. That's the heart of the answer of how do you solve that problem. And there's a lot of things we're going to do to try to get there, but I think the answers to those problems lie in how do we get more people playing multiplayer. And I'm curious if anyone has better ideas for that, but like Alara says, daily quests are maybe something that would be useful. Cosmetic rewards, like Merlin says, those are possibly true. So Helios says, counterintuitively, this was maybe even more true in ranked, which didn't allow allied victories because there was no natural way for people who didn't know each other so well to form alliances. Yeah, that was an unintended consequence of it, was that, okay, if you ended up in a ranked game and in that ranked game you realized, oh, I'm playing with this one person and I like this person, they can't actually form a real alliance, so nobody actually knows there's a real alliance, but like there's an alliance happening and you just don't know about it, and that kind of sucked. I don't know great answers to these questions right now. Having an alliance system as deep as we had it and having it be something that changed on the fly was something new in Callasia, but I thought it was also one of the stronger, more interesting points of Callasia, so I'd hate to get rid of that. I think it's a matter of tuning it. So Merlin says you could have locked alliances that formed in the lobby, where you can break alliances within the game that happen before the game begins, still allows friends to play together and doesn't allow backstabbing. That's actually something that we've talked about adding into Callasia as a patch, is to say, all right, the alliances are locked or not locked. And so, yeah, that's something that we'll definitely have. And I think we'll look at more alliance options and what we can't do in alliances. So Dwarf says, do you think randomly generated maps and shifting wind conditions could prevent a single dominating meta deck? So here's the thing. We can probably build a randomized map generator. Because we have a hex-based terrain, that's definitely a doable thing. Coming up with what the seeds for a random map generator are to make sure that the randomly generated maps are interesting and fun, because so much of the maps right now depend, where you're going to get your mana, where you're going to get your gold, depends on buildings, and making sure that those buildings are in interesting and fun locations for multiplayer gameplay and blah, blah, blah. Making randomized maps on this is not going to be making the game spew a bunch of hexes out and give you a map. I can have that for you by tomorrow. Having it do that in a way that makes interesting and fun maps is going to take some time and testing and work. But it's certainly something that I think we'll play with. If we're going to go down the road of having players be able to build their own maps, and since we've already gone through all the trouble to have a hex-based map world that can be built very quickly, the idea that we would allow random map generation is a pretty natively intuitive idea. The question is, how do we put in the AI for random map generation to make sure that they make interesting and fun maps? And I'm not sure how that works yet. That's work, and we'll have to look at that work. Things like, how do we make sure that there's not sections of the map that are surrounded by blocking tiles so that you can't get to them, or something is really overpowered or something like that. We have to look at those sort of things. But do I think that could prevent a single dominating meta deck? Yeah, I do. But I don't think you actually have to go that far. One of the things is this game has maps, and it's something that most trading card games don't have. And it's a whole new factor to the game that changes things. So if we say this is the dominating deck, Maybe a map that's got a whole bunch of swamps on it, and there's some creatures that do really, really well in the swamps. Maybe that means there's a much better deck to play in this map that's got a bunch of swamps in it. Maybe a map that has a lot of little tiny spaces that you have to get through makes this kind of unit stronger, because this is a frontline sort of unit that you know, I can put in front and I can keep buffing him from somebody behind, and nobody can get past him because he's standing in the middle of the pass. Maybe that's strong on this map. So I do think having maps means that making a single overpowering deck is going to be more difficult in this game. There is the other question, of course, is that going to be too much? Is the whole game going to be based on the maps? And the other question of how do we make sure that players know what map they're playing and know what kind of deck is going to make sense in this kind of map before they get into it. And this is a whole other can of worms that we have to get into of when we set up the multiplayer game. How do I know what map we're going to be playing in the multiplayer game if it's a non-random map, so that I can, you know, because if I say I'm going to play this game and I'm going to choose Alara's Apes, and Alara's Apes are the best map, or the best deck in the world for a map full of jungles, and somebody picks the snow map, and I'm like, there's no jungles, and I got all these friggin' apes. So we need to make sure that people can see the map, kind of get an idea of what they're going to get into, and then say, you know what, I've got a regiment that's going to do really well on this snow map because it's full of these units that have all these special benefits in the snow. And then if we have random maps, we have to say, well, how much of the random seed does the player understand when they get that? So when we say, you know, is it just a random map button? And I brought all these apes and it randomly made a whole snow world, and I'm like, dude, I got all these apes. Fuck it, I'm not gonna play. Click out, right? Or do they get to see some of the seeds of the randomization so they know, oh, okay, we're gonna randomize and it's going to be a winter map, and I think, I got the units that work well in winter, and I bring the right regiment for that. So these are all questions that are coming down the line as we build things. These are all the sort of things you don't think that you have to think about, but we have to think about. All right, here we go. Can you pick perks, penalties? If this is a regiment and not just some squad, doesn't it have ideals and goals? Something that can make one regiment different than another regardless of units selected. That is a good question. We're talking about that. I don't know. One thing that we've actually been thinking about is the idea. I don't know if anyone out here has ever played. There's an old Steve Jackson game, and it was called Illuminati. And it was one of my favorite games of all time. It was like this card-based game, and it was one of the old the plastic pocket box games. It had these little cards, and each card was like a group. It was like, you know, the Boy Scouts or the FBI or the, you know, some sort of organization. And you created this like really complicated control structure where like this organization controls this organization, controls this organization. So it was like the FBI controls the Boy Scouts, which are secretly controlling NASA. It was pretty cool, actually. It's a great game. If anyone has never played Illuminati, by all means, go play Illuminati. It's awesome. Classic old Steve Jackson game. But one of the reason I bring it up is they had the idea in it that when you started the game, everyone was randomly dealt an Illuminati. So you were like the UFOs or the Discordian Society or the Bavarian Illuminati. And each one of those things came with some special perks. So if you were the Bavarian Illuminati, for instance, you made a lot more money. If you were the Discordian Society, you got benefits to which alignment characters you could control, that sort of thing. But the other thing that they came with was they came with a special victory condition. So there was like a generic victory condition for the whole game, and then there was a specialized victory condition for each one of the special cards. Now, I don't know if we'd copy all of that, but I certainly think there's some wisdom to be taken in that, to the idea that maybe if I choose the Red Keep faction, maybe the Red Keep faction gives me a, when you have such and whatnot, then you get such and such a whatnot. That kind of stuff actually sounds very interesting to me, but it's the sort of thing that I need to think about in more detail after we get the sort of basics of making sure combat is fun and making sure that the factions themselves are fun without that. It's a wonderful idea for an addition. But I'm not promising anything, but it's stuff that we're already thinking about. You know, another thought was maybe there was the idea of, you know, something like the Hearthstone quests, where it was like, if you're playing Red Keep, then Red Keep gives you, if you do this set of things, then you unlock a certain thing for this this one faction. Maybe that's something else we could look at. So these are things we're thinking about, but I'm not promising anything because I don't know yet. Merlin says, honestly, as long as there's multiple interesting maps pre-made from a competitive point of view, that will probably ensure some diversity in unit selections in general anyway. Some maps will have more value for flying units, for instance. Yeah, that's kind of my hope. And this is something that most trading card games don't have. And I think, and this is something that we've realized as we've been building the game. This is, for instance, why it used to be that the regiment was formed of different units, and it was also formed of different powers. And those powers were global powers. And once we got in and started playtesting it, I realized very quickly, you know, what's actually cool about our game is we have a map. And if I have a global power, the global power doesn't take into account the map. And that sucks, because moving stuff around is what's interesting in our game. And that's what's special about us and what makes us not a trading card game. And so the more stuff that we can do that kind of flows out from that map, I think makes us more original as a game. So those are the kind of things I'm focusing on as a designer. Helios says, randomly generated maps sounds bad, like something like a Battle for Westnog where there are loads of different maps which require different strategies sounds more interesting. That's my gut feeling, but I promise you if we ship the game without a random map generator, the #1 request people will have is like, why aren't there random maps? So I don't know, I'm tempted. You know, Civilization was fun with a random map, so it's, you know, my guess is what's going to be interesting in the game is maps that people have thought about. And obviously we're going to ship with a ton of maps. You know, I can make maps very quickly, so that the idea that we can ship with quite a few maps is pretty easy to come to. So my guess is what's going to be most fun is maps that people have really thought about and really come up with interesting stuff for. And if I go back to classic strategy games like, you know, Warcraft or Command & Conquer, or, you know, these set of games, a lot of what made them fun was some map designer got in and made a really interesting map. And I kind of agree with Helios in that the randomly generated maps to me sound like less fun, but my experience has told me that the #1 thing they're going to ask for is, I want an editor because I think I can build better maps than you. And then the next thing is, well, if I got a map editor, how come I can't make random maps? Those are going to be requests that we're going to get. I don't actually have on the schedule to build a random map generator right now, so that's something we will be talking about. But I do have on the schedule, here's all the things that we need to do to make the editor available and useful for our players, and here's all the things that we need to do to allow players to share maps and upvote maps and that sort of thing. Because I do want to open that to the community, because I am certain, I'm 100% certain, as much as I think I'm a good designer, somebody out there is going to make better maps than me. That's just a fact. There's going to be some dude and he makes great maps, and I want him to have my editor and go make maps. And I want the community to upvote those maps, and I want people to play those maps. Every game I've ever made, that's always been true when you put a real editor together and build a community. So I'm hoping that that's, and again, this is something that I hope builds community. So Helios says, for unranked, have people pick the map when making the lobby, like in Callasia. For ranked, tell people that the map after both people have locked into the game, but before they've picked their factions, like when everyone's hit ready. Yeah, I think there's just a lot of little nuances to this that we have to figure out. But yeah, I mean, I think the general idea is the flow would be, hey, who wants to play a game together? We want to play a game together. What map do we want to play? This map. Oh, cool. Here's the factions I'm going to play for it. Now, the problem is that last step, I'm not sure that I want to sit around and wait for you to build a faction for that. So that's a little irritating, because you've been in multiplayer chat lobbies where it's like, come on, dude, press ready. And, you know, while you're all sitting there because you've all picked your factions that you've pre-made, some other dude's like, well, that's a snow map and I don't have a cool map for those snow levels. Let me go laboriously pick out 10 cards out of a couple hundred. I don't want that to happen, so I think we may only allow you to grab pre-made decks but this is all stuff we have to test out, because it may be the case that people play it and they're like, well, I don't have a deck for this map, and well, I'm going to drop because I don't have a deck for this map. And now we suddenly have a multiplayer lobby where everybody keeps joining levels, and as soon as you pick a map, half the people drop because they don't have a good deck for that level. That's my concern, and we have to look at solutions for those problems. Merlin, again, likes Helios's idea. It would be interesting to have a thing for each faction where the more units of that faction you take, the more of a bonus you get. That's actually a pretty cool idea. So like if you're all ape, you know, one thing we had also talked about was maybe if you pick only one faction, or maybe if you pick only two factions, then those factions work stronger for you. I don't know. These are all things that we can play with. I keep comparing to a trading card game. Will there be trading? No, there won't. And the reason there won't be is because you have everything. The reason we trade in a trading card game is because I go get a deck and I don't know how many rare or common or whatever I've got. In this game, when you buy Last Regiment, you own Last Regiment. You own all the units. If we do DLC later, if we do, here's the adventure of, the Kingdom of Gunnar, and the Kingdom of Gunnar has gnolls in it, then everybody who buys that DLC, they have all the gnolls. They don't have to, try to get rare gnolls or whatever. And this is the heart of game development. It's fun because when you're not a game developer, the big ideas, they're actually not that hard, right? That's the thing. People, when they think about being a game developer, they think about being a game developer as being like, hey, I was playing this game and I've got these, 5 really big ideas and they're really cool. And the truth is, most people have pretty good ideas. If you're a common game player and you play a lot of games, you probably have pretty good ideas about games. It's in all of those little details that the work of game development happens. The fun part of game development is this stuff, hey, we could do this and we could do this, and that sounds cool and it's fun. And I like these ideas. But always the actual thing that the reason we can't just like go make it tomorrow is because what we spend our time doing as game developers is all of the little corner cases and all of the little issues that develop when you decide you're going to do this and you hadn't thought about, if you do this, that actually means this. And okay, you had this other system over here and this system interacts with this system this way. And this is why sometimes people are like, I really want this system in this game. It doesn't have that. Well, it's because they've got systems A, B, and C over here, and systems A, B, and C are broken by new system D, right? So yeah, that's always the challenge. It's always frustrating to me a little bit because so many people have so many great ideas. But part of the process of game development, there's a really great game developer, Miyamoto, who did Donkey Kong and Zelda and all those other games, and he's always compared building a video game to a Japanese garden, being a Japanese dude, I guess, and that a game is done when you've removed everything that's not necessary to the game. And I think there's some truth to that, where there's always this inclination of here's 1,000 ideas, let's throw them all in the game. There's also that weaning process of these are really good ideas, but this idea doesn't work well with this idea. So which set of ideas are we going to go with, and how do we pull those ideas up? And sometimes that means we don't get this other thing. It was when we did Callasia, that was one of the things, is we got a lot of people who started playing Callasia and they wanted all of this stuff that they'd seen in Civilization. They were like, oh my God, you could have this and this and this and this. And I had to stop them and be like, well, yeah, but a turn in Civilization takes about 10 minutes and nobody's going to want to wait for that in a multiplayer simultaneous turn-based game. So we have to simplify this down so that people have 1-minute turns. And that was a strategic choice in building the game that we had to make. So anyway, Lord Hoppy mentions, something I would love to have in this game is a ruler mode. Each team has a unit that is a ruler, that if your ruler is killed, you lose. This creates another dynamic to the game, giving players a unit they have to keep safe. So if someone sends off an invading army but does not protect their ruler, they find... this was actually an idea that Alan had when we very first started talking about this game. The idea, we called it having a king, right? Like in chess, you got to protect the king and not get the king killed. And we threw this idea around that the victory condition of the game was save the king. The worry that I have is it prevents us from having a lot of interesting spells and abilities, like a nerf your, if I have a bunch of abilities that are like buff this guy, buff this guy, buff this guy. And so I start with, let's say, a militia unit, and I put 5 different buffs on the militia unit. Now I've got this ginormous militia unit who's got just this huge attack and this huge everything, and he's storming towards me. It's fun to have a debuff, bam, here's my counter to that. My counter to that is, kills any one unit, right? Well, shit, what if I use that on the king, right? Or make this unit not move anywhere, and now everyone pounces on him. I worry that there's too much. I'm going to have to limit a lot of what we can do in the game if I say that there's one unit in the game that could end the game by killing him. Now, that being said, we did introduce into the game the idea of hero units, and hero units are particularly strong units that you can only have one of on the game. And those units, I want to make them, I guess, instead of being the king in chess, they're the queen in chess, right? This is a big, interesting unit that you really don't want to lose. And so you're going to want to protect it. So, for instance, for the Pallava faction, which is sort of our Northern Kingdom's traditional trading company faction, they have a mage, and that mage has these incredibly strong buff spells. And it's very clear that she's designed to kind of be back behind your troops, you know, throwing these buffs forward and making your troops better. Here, make this troop invisible. Here, give this troop extra power. This gives, you know. So she's like this really nice behind the scenes buffing unit. And you really don't want to lose her because she's going to have a big cooldown. I'm not going to be able to summon her again very quickly if she dies, and I can only have one of her on the board. So this now gives you that midterm goal of, yeah, let's go kill that chick because she is causing us some trouble. So it's less of a king and more of a queen. Hey, Chris, I have a question. How do games that seem quite polished end up with seemingly moronic game design choices in them? For example, I've been playing a Hearthstone clone called Star Crusade, and its arena has points where sometimes you must get matched with a certain faction opponent, so they cut their potential pool of opponents to about 1/8 of what it normally is. There's no way they should be So the core question is, why do game developers do stupid things? Now, having done a number of stupid things myself as a game developer, the answer is multifold. One, they may not be making the game that you think they're making. Like, and you may be right. You may think like it should be this game, and you might be right. It really ought to be this game. But when they were originally thinking of it, that wasn't the game that they had in their minds, and that ends up making a lot of these decisions where players play it and they're like, I don't understand why the game developer is doing this. This is a stupid decision. Well, yeah, it's a stupid decision if you wanted the game to be the game that you wanted it to be, but if they wanted it to be the game they wanted to be, it's not a stupid decision. Sometimes they just don't play games enough. You'd be surprised how little game developers play games because we spend so much time making games. I would say pretty much everyone who's in this chat right now probably plays more video games per week than I do. This is just a fact. I don't have time to play video games because I make video games for a living, and it's a very time-consuming process. And so I have to actually, schedule time in my budget to go out and play competitors' games and to look at other people's games and to come up with the, I guess, common sense. Because you say in your next comment, I could literally told them that without even knowing anything about the game. For you, this was common sense. And part of the reason for you it's common sense is, common sense, you aren't born with common sense. Common sense is a thing that comes through experience. And you have common sense about a subject because you have a wide range of experience in that subject. And you would be surprised, a lot of game developers just don't have the experience in the game that they're making that you do. That's an actual thing. It's a surprising, unintuitive thing, but it's a real thing. And then sometimes they just fuck up. I mean, it's as simple as that. Sometimes you get shiny objected where you start thinking about this one thing that you want your game to do, and you say, okay, I want to do this and this and that, and that creates these sort of spin-off, okay, if I do this and that, then that means I need to do this, and that creates this problem with this system here, so I need to do this as a solution. And you work yourself down into this rabbit hole of decisions where if you look at the final decision just all by itself objectively, you're like, that's not a good idea. But if you trace the logic back of how you got to that decision because there was some other dream that you had that you were trying to fulfill, it seems like a reasonable decision. And this is actually why I do early access. This is why I do these dev streams, because it's actually good practice for me once a week to sit in front of you guys and say, this is what we're going to do. This is why I'm doing this. And you guys don't know the back catalog of all the technical decisions and this is how our technology works and all of the, you don't care. You don't know that stuff. What you know is Chris says he's going to put this in the game and you don't want that in the game, and you say, I don't want that. And here's why I don't want it, and here's why it sucks. And for me, that's great, useful information. It's an objective opinion. And this is why when I look at Callasia, I wish we had started early access sooner. I wish we had done this process that I'm doing right now with Callasia where I got in this early in the game and explained to people what we were going to do, I would have made better decisions. So this is my solution to that problem.